Okay, and Rachel Patterson. Rachel is unavailable today. She's on a big mission, top secret mission. So we will miss her today. But we have Melanie Jacobson with us today. Hi, Melanie. How
Hello,
you
good
doing?
morning. I'm good, thank you.
So Melanie is she is from ID 360. And Melanie, can you tell us what ID 360 is?
Yes, thank you, and thank you so much for having me on the show today. So ID360 is a sustainability and green building consulting company. We work with the public and private sector on multiple different issues related to sustainability, really focusing on energy conservation, water conservation, all related to buildings and climate change.
So today's topic is energy and sustainability. So it's a hot topic here in the state of California, which we are both based out of, but it is reaching all across the country because we need to really protect our environment and our climate. So with that, Melanie, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in the energy industry, just altogether? Because that's very foreign to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I got started about 20 years ago. I went to UC Davis and studied environmental design and got involved in Sacramento in my time at Davis. So, getting into policy related to buildings, energy efficiency, and climate change. So that's where I originally got into the industry and really took it from there. I did production architecture for a while, and then um, went into sustainability specifically on building design and construction from there, and I've been doing that ever since.
So when you're in school, were you just like, what was your, what did you go to school for? And then how did you kind of transition over there? So what did you originally go to UC Davis for?
Yeah, so I studied design and with an emphasis on environmental design, so the built environment, and with a, in my senior year, really focused on the environmental impacts of buildings. And so that's what I originally studied. And there was a lot of transfer between Sacramento policies and Davis. So it was a natural bridge, no pun intended, to get to Sacramento from that point.
No, and it's awesome because we see a lot of bills come in and out, and you see the energy code changing like constantly, like 40 years ago, you had you had a different type of, you didn't see solar panels on people's homes, or you didn't see, I was in the Navy, so we were riddled with asbestos all over the place, so when it comes to energy, what's one of the, for us, one of the things I want to kind of bring across today, because like I said, it's a little bit foreign to me as far as energy. I'm a code enforcement person, so we enforce certain codes, and now that we're seeing all these new codes, we're trying to build a nexus on how code enforcement can work with enforcing some of these energy compliant codes. Because accessibility is one of those things. On in another branch that code enforcement is going to have to eventually enforce. It's not happening yet, but same thing with sustainability. It's something that we're probably going to get into in the next few years. So I want to give the audience a little bit of kind of a little tutorial on what these terms mean, why it's important, why you're so focused, and then why cities are paying attention. Because going to the website, I see some of the projects that you worked on. Like, for example, like 10 years ago, you didn't see a lot of home charging stations for vehicles, or you don't see parking stalls that require, you didn't see that 10 years ago, and now you're seeing more of that. You're seeing more 100% uh, carbon free homes and stuff like that are coming into play. So tell us a little bit about how how these how the energy fields evolving.
Oh, absolutely, and that's a large question. So I'll work on, yeah, putting it here and bringing it down. So basically, so in California, the building code is updated, as you know, every 3 years, and we're coming into the next building code cycle, which starts in January. And of all of the chapters of the building code, the energy code, which lives in part 6 of the California building code, has a very specific mission, and that is to reduce energy use. So if it has to do with efficiency, or reducing the amount of energy used in the built environment, any for most building types in California, so most homes and businesses. So that's what the code is focused on, is to reduce energy. And it is a very complex code. It's and it started in the 70s, the California Energy Code. And so it's evolved quite a bit, and since that time. And the way that it works typically is, the market creates innovation, technologies that are tested in the marketplace, to become tried and true. At which point, the ideas are introduced at the state level to become part of the code if they make sense, if they're cost effective, if the workforce is ready to receive them. So there's all kinds of characteristics that go into making something that's a good idea in terms of energy saving and then putting it into code. So that's a long 3-year process that goes on, and we're actually, the codes are going to be coming into play this coming January, but we're already starting to talk about the next 2026 code now, because the process is so detailed and rigorous. So that's how the codes come into play. The dynamic and the different parts of the code are far-reaching. So there's so many different specialty experts that go into building these codes, which makes it very complex to understand as a code enforcement professional. The good news is that the state has developed this software, and it's been around for over a decade now. But what the software does is it takes an algorithmic approach to the code and makes it kind of become digestible, if you will. So certain aspects of a building are put into the software, and then information is given back to the software, the energy modeler is what it's called, about a list of things that need to happen on the building in order to make it more energy efficient. So it makes it take a very complex idea and turn it into something actionable. And that's what the code does at the compliance level. So there are these energy reports that are now are required for most permit types, and those accompany the building permit application. And that's kind of how it works in reality.
So I know you work with a lot of large scale projects like with Apple and all these things, but as a for a small homeowner, what are some considerations that one needs to look at when upgrading a home? Like for example, like just window change outs or insulation. What
Mhm.
are kind of simple things that somebody in somebody that's not building a big development or something like that can focus on on their daily when they're planning to upgrade their home?
That's a great question, and with not a simple answer. In most cases, it will depend on when the building was built and the technology that's currently in the building. So, in our market, we talk about whole building energy performance. So a building is not just the sum of its parts; it is how it operates in tandem with each other. So that's why we talk about whole building energy modeling. It's not just the windows or the roof or the insulation. It's how those all work together. So it's hard to know unless we step foot inside the home what's the low hanging fruit. Now, obviously, if there's a draft coming in through the window, you're going to want to take a look at that from an energy perspective. But the bill that that homeowners receive and business owners alike every month from the utility tells a great story about where the energy is being used, how it's being used, and at what time of day. These are all really important aspects when take into consideration when thinking about the energy efficiency of a building, a home, or a business.
So that that information is it's in a utility bill, because I know a lot of people. People like myself. I just look at like how much do I have to pay, I mean, I really don't look at the time of day or the wattage, but I know those metrics are out there, and I know I've gotten a letter saying, hey, reduce your energy use between this time, or if there's a large consumption, here, install this box, we'll give you a discount, and we'll turn off we'll turn off your AC at this time.
Yes.
So so that's why, is that why the utility companies do that?
Yes, absolutely. The time of use, so the time that you use energy makes a really big impact on the utility, the cost of that energy. So the local, wherever, you're sitting in your, in at your desk or wherever you are, your local utility provider, at least in California, is required to help think through some of these items. There's rebates and incentives offered for that low hanging fruit in terms of energy efficiency. So that's usually the best first call to make if you're looking to put emphasis on saving energy. Calling the utility, because part of their agreement with the state of California, at least in California, is to help users save energy. That's part of their compensation package. So helping users save energy is part of their mission. So that's usually the best call to make first when embarking on that journey. And it is a journey, right? Because buildings are living, breathing items. Well, they're not living really, but we like to think of them as dynamic and ever changing based on a number of different factors.
And that's really good information, because as a code official, sometimes we deal with low income folks, and we see these old windows, or we see things that they're always, a lot of times there's like, oh, well, I can't afford this this citation, because I'm low income. And I mean, we're code officials. Sometimes some of us have those things that beat, boom boom boom, the heartbeat, whatever you call it. So anyways, when we talk to them, it's good information to say, hey, maybe you may save some money in reducing by looking at your energy consumption and stuff like that. That's good information to give. And the fact that you're giving us kind of a little bit of tidbit on giving homeowners these tips, and say, hey, you may want to look at your utility bill. Or sometimes we walk into homes and you feel draft, and you're like, hey, you may need caulking around the window, or you may want to, they're old windows, or they're actually glass windows instead of like dual pane. Or you start looking at these things, and you can say, hey, there's a lot of energy grants out there that a lot of jurisdictions get through economic development, and you say, hey, you may want to apply for this grant. We have money to help you change out your windows or whatnot, but you have to be in compliance with certain codes. So I mean, that's out there. And I in reading your website, I see that you guys work with a lot of city councils and provide this type of information. So how does when you go to like a council meeting, because I know that's what sometimes you guys do, you give presentations on the importance of energy efficiency. What are some of the questions that you get from city councils as far as sustainability and energy efficiency?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of working with cities, we work with a lot of cities and jurisdictions throughout the state of California, and city council members typically want to make a really big impact, right, related to the climate change. And so most cities have adopted or in the process of adopting something called a climate action plan. And this climate action plan is a robust plan that looks at all the greenhouse gas emissions related to a city and what can be done about it. That's basically what it is. And these are very long plans, very good reading material for evening. And in terms of building energy use has a pretty large impact when you're looking at like a pie chart of all greenhouse gas emissions from a city. So the number one question we get is, well, what's the low hanging fruit in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions? And then what's the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak? So, we really focus on those two questions. And right now, the low hanging fruit is looking at how do we decarbonize our buildings. And this is a term that has come into our industry conversation over the last few years, and is really takes a look at, well, what does it take to have our buildings operate at a similar or at a similar capacity, but produce less carbon emissions. So that's the question, and that there's lots of solutions for that. Of what when the rubber meets the road, what does that look like? There's a really big push right now related to decarbonizing our appliances in homes, because those are the energy using essence of homes and buildings, or is the appliances in general. So taking a look at, well, okay, well, what are the carbon emissions coming, where are they coming from now, and where can we get rid of that? I mean, that's really a very basic question, and the question that we are working with jurisdictions to answer. And it depends, right? Because there are 16 different regions, which we call climate zones in the state of California. And each climate zone has a different set of geographical realities, climate in terms of the weather, how does that look like throughout the year? So buildings perform differently in each of these different zones. Sure. So the state has done these very robust studies to look at, okay, well, what does it mean for this climate zone? Climate zone 1, climate zone 2. So those questions all get answered on a climate zone basis. So it's a very technical term. I know it gets very technical. But in terms of like what is happening right now, that is absolutely the number one conversation, is decarbonizing buildings and how do we do that? And the utilities, both the investor-owned utilities and municipal utilities or public utilities, are really working to answer that question. And there's a number of different factors, and even when you're talking about incentives and rebates that we were talking about earlier, that is a very large conversation in terms of how do we do this quickly and make it cost effective for both building owners, but also renters, right? Because renters make up the majority of people living in this state. I mean, that's a reality. And so there's a couple new programs. One is called the TECH program, and one is called the BUILD program. So simple terms, but are looking to how do we get funds into transitioning out of these high carbon producing, which is directly related to energy efficiency appliances. So that's really the push right now, and in some ways it's the low hanging fruit and the best option. So that's I think in a nutshell.
That's it's funny because people like myself, or many of my colleagues, we really don't ever, in code enforcement, we really don't look at some of these things. We just don't. I mean, you hear about the energy action plan, you hear about these things, or you hear like, hey, you know what, now the state requires you to process solar panels in X amount of time now, so there's these pushes for these energy programs, but for common folk, they don't people that aren't really paying attention to this stuff really don't, we don't understand why it's so important. And one of your main things is educating the public on why it's important. And when we talk about a carbon footprint, like, for example, people's like, hey, you don't want to leave this carbon footprint. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? It's like, so I, for me, like I ended up, it's kind of a weird story, but I ended up buying a hydrogen vehicle, and I'm like, oh, cool. You have a zero carbon footprint. I'm like, all right, cool. And so, but then it's so difficult to, to pump up. So I have to like kind of play like whack-a-mole, like, hey, I have to go here or there. So it makes it a little bit difficult to be, to be very consistent and being energy efficient. It's hard, So I know, and sometimes some people feel it's costly. Now, is that a myth that it's costly, or is it a long game? It's actually cheaper.
Yep, you nailed it right on the head in terms of what we always talk about, life cycle cost. So there's first costs when you're building something or renovating, and then there's the total cost of ownership, which is how much does it cost to operate over the life of that building or that appliance or whatever component you're talking about. So if you're and if you're thinking about um, making an investment and you're going to be owning that investment or living in there, if you're a renter and you're going to be living in that for a period of time, if you look at the total cost of what it's going to take to, let's say, a water heater, right, is very simple, a simple one. Um, the cost of operating a water heater is X. And if you can get it down by 10%, let's say, just as an example, that cost down, over time, that becomes like a pretty nice chunk. So if a conversation with the utility, with your landlord, if you're a renter, or and if you're a building owner directly with the utility, to find out about incentives of what that would take to switch over to a more efficient technology or something that makes a little more sense, then that can turn into a lot of money, over time. So that's really the first cost can be daunting, right? If you look at what it costs to, and just for example, replace your water heater in kind versus upgrading to something like with a heat pump. There's a little bit of upfront work to do. However, the total cost over time will, it'll be nice to see that what that bank account looks like in 10 years with all that extra cash in there. So that's how I'd like to think about it when you think about the total cost of ownership. Same with a car, right? Similar, where if you maintain your car well, you're going to get more years out of it typically. So it's a similar idea.
Yeah, and then there's also the maintenance portion of it too, for these things. I installed solar panels a couple years back, and they're a little bit dated, but I have to go up on the roof and clean the solar panels, in order to get a little bit more, more bang for my buck.
Yes.
so um, same thing with vehicles. They say, hey, just keep your tires inflated to the right psi, and hey, there you go. You reduce the emissions here and there.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to, and I know what we're talking about, like the general public, as to, like being cost efficient with like insulation. And when we talk about water, you talked about a water heater. What's something somebody can do in terms of water, for, energy efficiency?
For energy efficiency, well, specifically for water heaters, I mean, that there's a really big push right now to transition water heaters into what's called heat pump technology. So, um, really being more efficient with that water and having a much more efficient system heating that water up. And some of the technologies available now are pretty impressive, where you can have a water heater heat the water when the energy is cheaper, and then store it to be used when energy is more expensive. So the technology, the computer programming, if you will, that's available in these newer technologies can really service that goal that you're talking about, which is saving water, saving energy. And a lot of it is coding, right? Not like coding, like computer coding. It's really a cool time in the market, where the computer aspects of buildings are really helping us in so many ways.
And it's funny because, I always tell the origin story on how I met you. And when we met, like, you talked a lot about energy, and I was just like, like, what are you talking about? So, and it's funny because I meet a lot of folks and I talk about code, and you're like, what are you talking about? We're just like these two nerds in our own industry, So
Yeah.
you're getting all giddy about like the energy code, which is good, and shows the passion that you have for what you do, and one of the things that I wanted to bring you on the show for, you say you've been doing this for 20 years. You don't look a day over 25, but at the same time, you started this, your own consulting firm, and
Mhm.
how does one do that when it comes to energy? And I know with Four Leaf, we worked with you guys before, and I see that you work with a lot of municipalities. So how does one take an idea and say, what, it could be done better, it could be done more efficiently, it could be, we can give this resource to jurisdictions. How did you get started with ID 360? In other words.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, I knew that I wanted to be in this world, talking and solving these problems. So I literally found the best in the business to, be my mentors and watch them for years, be stars in what they're up to, so that I could one day take that and transfer it on. And so that was my strategy. Is I went and I found the best people doing this and just started listening. And in some cases I interned at the very beginning and then went on to work for a great company that worked on the energy code for 20 years. And I watched that process unfold, and it was really fascinating. And so that mentee mentorship apprentice style is really was the strategy that I took, and that's the approach that we take at our firm too, is that apprenticeship role, because most people learn in practice. I mean, there's limited amount that you can learn in a classroom, which is a great strategy. I'm not saying that's not important, but learning on the job is such a powerful model, that we really believe in training and learning, as in real time. That's one of the reasons we started our academy, which we started that right at the beginning when we started this company, and have now turned it into a public product so that people can take trainings from us for like solving real issues, boots on the ground, so to speak, on how do we interpret these codes, apply these codes in practice. It's such a powerful part of becoming an expert, is to be around other experts and learn from them. That's really the I think the shortest path. That's what I found.
And one of the reasons that we like bringing people like Melanie is like, maybe a lot of folks haven't heard of Melanie Jacobson, but you know what? That if you look at she's involved in this industry. And if you go to the website, you actually can do the on-demand courses, and they are preferred provider courses, so you can get your credits and learn something. I always find it exciting when a firm can offer some training for others in the industry and say, hey, we don't care if you're a competitor, we don't care if you're like your mom and just want to learn about uh, energy efficiency, or you want to get into the energy efficiency field. That resource is out there, compliments of ID 360. So thank you for that, Melanie. And when you w- you doing this, what's your favorite, because I always have to ask, what's your favorite part of of your firm? Is it the consulting? Is it the outreach? Is the education? What's your favorite thing that you're always like, man, that's my meat and potatoes, and everything else, I mean, it's still good, but that you just have a passion for.
We personally, my passion is supporting the public policy process, and supporting leading visionaries who really want to make a difference from a policy perspective, and helping that process through. And that's really become our our primary focus. Especially with the code change happening in California, that's been our primary focus, and supporting that process, because it's important that there be an expert on hand to watch that through, engage the community, to receive feedback, make sure if a policy idea will custom fit that local area. That's really my personal passion. And the training as well, that the academy is really kind of my karma project. I feel so grateful to have gotten such amazing mentorship over the years, that this is me passing it on. I'm not the only one giving the trainings online, but our team is really passing on what we know, and we will, yeah, no matter if it's a competitor, anyone, if we can collaborate, our in the entire industry will improve. And I believe that, at the core. So that's what it's all about.
No, I 100% agree. I'm a four leaf guy, but I do have other firms that come onto the show because I find it so important to share the information, sharing the information on energy. Like I'm a little bit fortunate to be able to, like, if I have an energy question, I'll give you a call.
Yeah.
Not everybody has that, not everybody, that's what I say. Not everybody has the bat line. So but it's always good, and being able to follow a lot of these new trends, like up in Sacramento. It's important for us to know what's going on in code enforcement. We get these new legislations, and then they get implemented January 1st or July 1st, and then everybody's like, well, what does that mean? And we're like a year later, and you're like, hey, what have you been doing? Same thing with something that you do, and you having been able to understand that public policy, and how the bills are being put together, and what legislations proposed. I mean, it's important. And what's something that's kind of happening right now in Sacramento that we should be aware of as far as energy efficiency goes?
Yeah, great question. So statewide, all of the codes are going to be changing come January 1st, and there's a pretty big shift happening on a code perspective to uh, encourage what we're calling decarbonization. The industry is calling it that, which is preferencing heat pump technology, which is what we spoke about before. And that's a pretty big shift, to look at. Well, how do we reduce the amount of carbon emissions coming from buildings? And that's one of the directions that's being implemented statewide. Um, Now, for commercial buildings, we've got a pretty big change happening in January, where uh, battery storage will be required for any commercial building that pulls a building permit application, and that's a pretty big shift, from where we were, say, 5 years ago, where solar was really this kind of voluntary idea. Well, now we're effectively, what a great opportunity to have a commercial building, have a solar panel system, and then that energy can be stored on site to be used. I mean, talk about resilience. That is a fantastic opportunity for buildings to be able to operate no matter what's happening. Be it natural disaster or outage, whatever it is, that building has the opportunity to continue to operate for a period of time, with that storage. That's a big shift. And then, what we're also seeing, and we're working with a number of jurisdictions now, on developing what's called a local energy reach code. And what that is it's a reach beyond what the state requires. So no matter where you are within the state of California, pulling a building permit, you have to meet the energy code baseline. That's just a requirement. Some jurisdictions are saying, well, we want to go farther, and this is what we're going to do. And these are our goals. And so we help those jurisdictions develop that procedure, develop the policy strategy. We engage the community, and create that framework, the roadmap, in order to help those jurisdictions adopt more restrictive policies, in addition to what the state requires. So that's definitely a big push. There's over 70 jurisdictions in the state that have already adopted these codes, and over 100 more that are in consideration. So these are here to stay for this code cycle for sure. And the state too has said that this is an important goal for local communities to be able to decide what makes sense for their community. So these are here to stay. So that's definitely the big trend that we're seeing, and really focusing on electrification. There's a lot of push towards electrifying buildings versus having natural gas be the primary energy fuel source for a home or a business. So those are definitely two massive efforts happening right now.
Sure. Now, one of the things, when new these new laws pass, or you're giving a presentation, us in code enforcement, whenever they pass a new ordinance, let's say, for example, the straw ordinance, that somebody's like, you can't use plastic straws, and you have a group of people's like, yeah, it's good for the environment. The other group's like, well, what do you want us to do? So when you get those things, now when it comes to energy, what are some of the misconceptions, or opposition that you may hear, that you want to demystify, today, we have an audience, and say, hey,
Yeah.
sometimes people say, hey, this is going to cost an arm and a leg, or this is you know somebody shaking your fist and saying, no, we don't need this. What are some things that you hear sometimes, and you kind of want to say, hey, let me explain, this is what's going on, and this is something that you may want to consider, because it's a long lasting, and it's evolving field. What are some things that you hear sometimes, that you're like, hey, you know what, I want to demystify what the comment that you made.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely cost is the number one question we get, just in terms of, is this going to cost me more? I mean, that's really, and the answer is no. In the state of, especially when it comes to mandates, jurisdictions are not allowed to adopt something that is not cost effective, and it needs to be demonstrated as such. And so, the in terms of the effectiveness of some of this new heat pump technology, I mean, it really blows everything else out of the water in terms of the effectiveness, mainly because we're not combusting anything. So when you use heat pump or electricity, um, the efficiency is like 350% versus like gas appliances are high upwards of like 95%. And one of the primary reasons is there's no combustion happening. And that is actually a pretty big shift in terms of human health. And you don't really think about that in terms of your energy, the energy that is being used in your building, your home. But that combustion can actually really, there have been a number of studies, and I can link it in the show notes for you, about the human health aspect of asthma and gas fired stoves. So it's just an unbelievable correlation. So the human health aspect is somewhat overlooked, and I think that should become a bigger conversation that we have when it comes to safety of appliances, and how these issues really cross overlap. The issues related to human health and saving energy. Well, we actually have solutions that can do both now. So these are really important subjects when it comes to your question.
Yeah, and right now we're talking more about the residential, and I know, yeah, you get really passionate about these big commercial projects that you work on. So what are some cool things and innovations that you're seeing out there that aren't laws, but people are implementing, that you're like, wow, you're just kind of blown out of the water? Is there anything like commercial, in the commercial realm, that you see that you're like, wow, it's just exciting?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the concept of climate responsive design is a very industry term, but it's basically having a building respond to the climatic realities of where it's situated. And I think having the goal of having a wow, okay, a real wow, for me is having a goal to operate in a total resilient fashion. So, the pipe dream for any low carbon building is having solar panels that can fuel the building, a storage system that can store that energy for use, and then the electric vehicles that plug in to that storage. I mean, it really becomes this. Uh, it's a systemic solution where the storage, which effectively creates a little what we call a microgrid, um, and allows building owners to really write their own ticket, if you will. So that's what gets me excited, is when you're really thinking it's not just about changing out this appliance. It's like, how do we rethink the whole thing so it works in a way that we could never imagine before? Kind of like leapfrogging.
Yeah.
If, leapfrog over what the realities are today. How do we just rethink the whole thing from the ground up? In San Francisco, there's an ordinance for uh, reusing black water, which is basically treating water on site for reuse. And these are the kind of leapfrog technologies where we hadn't even considered something like that before 10, 15 years ago. And now we're seeing all this new innovation come online because the demand is there. So it's a real powerful tool that consumers have and building owners, commercial building owners have.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's me me as a code guy, I don't look at this stuff, but it's so exciting because I'm actually nerding out on some of the stuff that you're saying. I'm like, oh man, that's cool. No, but you get to see this firsthand. Like we get to, in the code industry, we get to see the you know we get to see the new things that pop up, like the new trends, like the marijuana, like illegal marijuana girls, and you're like, hey, even they're going energy efficient. you know and, we see the massage parlors, we see this, and and we think we're like, wow, that's cool stuff. And for us, we get excited when when you go to a house and they got like 50 vehicles, and you give them a compliance order, and we come back, they're all gone, and you're like, what? And then you get excited. We're like, wow, dude, like their carbon emissions are like, you're like, wow, that's awesome. It's always good to like kind of hear a different perspective. And no, it's always that's why I love bringing random people on the show, and like getting to learn about the industry, because you guys are part of the built environment. You guys focus on energy and energy efficiency, and people don't really look at the green code as as an enforcement tool mostly. But you know what, I my prediction is in a couple of years we are going to be enforcing some of these, like, hey, you have a inoperable charging station, somebody's going to complain. So now we're going to, like, hey, the property maintenance code kicks in and saying, hey, that's something that needs to be maintained and fully operational. So we're going to have to kind of start knowing these things, because even when you have dilapidated solar panels, because it's gonna happen. Even though it's new technology, this stuff tends to, you never know with new technology, if like the windows start decaying, you know this stuff. So
Right.
So I think for us, it's important to kind of know what these things are and how they affect the home or businesses, and say, hey, you know what, this is gonna end up falling kind of in our realm sooner or later. Because right now you're talking about the these heat pumps or water pumps, for, and and if they're in a apartment complex and then they fail, one of the tenants is going to call and say, hey, the pump's not working. And it becomes a code enforcement issue now that you have you have lack of heat and water. So so it's important for us to kind of get a little bit of grasp of the these different appliances, different what they do, why they're so important, and also that they're maintained. So I think for us, it's important to kind of know where you're coming from. For you, it's more exciting because you see the new technology. You're not focused on the solar panels from like the 1990s. Yeah, you're more focused on the new solar panels that are like windows. You're like, they're solar panel windows. You're like, wow. Or you see these new power banks in the garage, and you're like, wow, these are awesome things that you see. So now when it comes to like EV stations, I mean, like the electric charging stations, what are some new technologies that you're seeing? Because even that's changing as we're going.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think early on in the EV infrastructure, if you will, the charging, the
Yeah.
gas pump looking appliance, there was a lot of questions about space and how much, having bollards, those, blocking cars from running into them, and all these kinds of questions that there was a lot of fear, if you will, of never seeing that before. And how does the fire marshal address that? And, is there a disconnect to make sure that, if there's ever an event, it can be disconnected. So I think a lot of those barriers that were a real barrier to entry, if you will, barrier to entry into the market of installing one in a home or a business, a lot of those we're seeing those kind of disappear because a lot of the questions have been answered. I think the technology itself is becoming faster. You can charge a vehicle quicker than, let's say chargers from 5, 10 years ago. But I think the real shift is the barrier to entry is being removed. And a lot of that is, thanks to state mandates and local jurisdictions stepping up to say, okay, well, if you're going to install an EV charger, here are the things that we need to see, and get an over-the-counter permit. Kind of everyone really understanding. It's really the code. The code enforcement is where the rubber meets the road. It's kind of the most important part in some ways, and that's why our firm is so drawn to ICC and just the code world in general, is because this is where things actually happen, and that's a wonderful place to be. But in terms of EVs, I think we're really, once the market and all corners of the market are educated on what this is, how it works, how is it different, that's where we can really see mass adoption.
That's awesome. And see, it's interesting the stuff that you learn on a daily basis, because you do this daily, and I do code enforcement. If I start talking to you about like the best way to enforce a lady with 100 cats, it'd be like I don't know,
I was calling you on the bat phone for that one.
It's like, hey Pete, do 100. What's going on with 100 cats? I go, all right, don't go in there without a air apparatus, so so yeah, so we have our own things, and I think it's exciting that we get to learn about this stuff, even though this is more for code enforcement, but knowing these different things about sustainability. We a couple months ago we had more on water with Hope Medina, and and so we talk about different things. We talk about fire suppression, and I mean, these are things that are important in our industry, because we're even though we're kind of like segmented in different areas, whether it's energy or fire or building or code enforcement or planning, we're all in this together, because at the end of the day, somebody wants to build, something, some new technology. A lot of times it has to go through planning, and planning is not always the easiest place to navigate through. You get stuck in
Yes,
planning
yes.
commission, and you're like, well, what is this? Or and then now you have to go and do an education piece for the planning commission, and it gets a little bit, when new technologies, you kind of become the guinea pig for other jurisdictions. And I know you've done work in Palo Alto, and in those kind of those areas, Silicon Valley areas, and
Mhm,
they're very progressive, so you see a lot of cool innovative stuff.
mhm.
So and bringing it to little town. I'm in Bellflower, California. Just bringing in some of that technology into our city. It's a lot of people are like, hey, it's a difficult. So how do you navigate through some of these planning issues sometimes when it's new technologies and you're trying to help a client implement something
Mm.
new?
Well, I mean, from a planning perspective, I mean, there's certain aspects of planning that you can't get you can't get past. But in a lot of ways, the issues that related to energy and green building and sustainability um, really don't involve a lot of planning, unless you're talking about like a large commercial
Yeah.
development trying to get entitlement. Well, that's a different kind of story.
Yeah.
They definitely will have stipulations in their planning entitlement uh, related to sustainability, and some are code related, and some will be voluntary. But from your kind of average uh, endeavor related to energy efficiency, it's really a building department level kind of issue.
Awesome.
I mean, there's really not much. I mean, aside from I mean, one challenge that sometimes we see with, um, heat pumps is just in terms of having that heat pump near the property line because it has to be outside in most cases. So that's really the only overlap there that we've seen. It really is, in most cases, you can go to the building permit and get what you need done there. So I would say,
Ooh.
yeah, use, aside from large developments, that's a different thing because
Yeah.
they have,
Yeah. And
it's
I know
just,
you work with large developments, so that's why I'm kind of
Mhm.
asking the question because, I've seen some, I'll give you an example. I remember when, I was working in this city of Bellflower,
Mhm.
Kaiser was redoing, they actually did their parking structure and built this massive solar panel. They were one of the first here in Bellflower. I mean, just in LA County that I've heard of that did something like that. Like did a huge thing. And I remember everybody was like, running around with planning, and then we're like, it ended up getting built. And so I don't know how they're using the energy, but I'm pretty sure they're using it effectively. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
they wouldn't have invested like all that money for if it wasn't. But I remember it was a big deal, and I remember going to another jurisdiction where the legislation changed, where it became easier for you to get an over the counter, expedited, solar permit.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's good. And in other you know you see other places in the country that are going through the same issues because all this new technology is foreign to them, and they don't really understand it. So it's good to have resources like your academy to be able to say, hey, you know what, hey, this is a 101 on energy efficiency, or this is what this means, or and I see the different types of classes that you guys offer, and some are a little bit more complex that are specific to certain programs. So kudos to ID 360 for that. So I love learning about this stuff. I know I ask a lot of questions because it's foreign to me, and I love learning, and and I love referring people to the industry experts. I'm like, don't ask me that question, go call Melanie. So email Melanie. So
Yeah.
what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put your if anybody has any questions, I will provide your email address, so people
Okay,
can reach
great.
out to you if that's okay with you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Love to hear from
it's and then, so anything else that you think it's important information to put out there to our general public? I know we're going on an hour here, and I know it doesn't feel like an hour, but yeah, and I know you could talk about this stuff all day long. So
you. Yeah.
is there anything like that's happening out there that kind of want to kind of bring out to the forefront and say, hey, this is the cool stuff happening, or this is what we're doing with ICC, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it more of just kind of a general message of there are solutions out there, right? The conversation around climate change is huge, and we as an industry can do this. I mean, there are solutions. It's just a matter of mechanisms, making it happen, and getting more people involved. So that's what I'm all about. So yeah, and so yeah, and if somebody's new and wants to get involved and learn about this market, we do have a lot of classes that are available online, and yeah, happy to support the community to make it happen.
So right here, hopefully I got it right. It's Melanie at integrateddesign360.com. If
Yes.
anybody has any questions on energy, or looking for some insight or consulting, she's definitely available. So thank you for joining us today. I'm pretty sure we're gonna have more questions for you. I know I'm always looking for new information and content. So I'll definitely be reaching out to you on certain projects. So thank you,
Great.
Melanie, for we missed Rachel today, but hey, we had a great conversation, and I
Yes,
love learning about energy. All right, everybody. Well, thank you, and we will see you next week. We don't know who the guest is yet, but we will see you next week. All right, thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will see you soon. Bye.
thank you.